Hello and welcome to another episode of Lectures of Fallen Wisdom. Today it's just going to be short and sweet. There is an ego operating inside your mind. You can see it when it's just that random thought process that flows in your mind. That's ego thinking. As long as you identify with that thought, as long as you let that thought process affect you, you can't turn down the volume on that thought process, you are going to be in the ego state. And in the ego state, you cannot be happy. You can have very brief moments of happiness in the ego state, but ultimately you're living your life not feeling good, especially if you're identifying with the thoughts that are churning in the ego mind. That churning thought of the ego mind is the cap that keeps the bliss out of your brain. As soon as you can remove that from your consciousness, so as soon as you can remove yourself from identifying with it, understanding that it's just an autopilot that generates its own thought field so that it can figure out in its very egoistic way how to be a better autopilot for you when you do have moments where you're just not in control, usually like in the early part of the morning or after you've had like a few too many drinks of alcohol. Your ego is an important thing for times when you're just not all there. It will go into autopilot and get you out of certain situations based on a very narrow understanding of what is in the self-interest immediately of that person. The self-interest as opposed to the spiritual one. So the more you live your life on autopilot, the less bliss that's just going to come in. Now, you can still be on autopilot. It's just that little thought ring that is constantly churning doesn't need to be part of it. Your autopilot can still engage without that thought churn affecting you. And so you can comfortably silence that part of your machine, or you can clap it away like a poof of air in your mind, because it's just a cloud of molecules of thought that really have no relation and really aren't helping you or your ego solve any of its problems. So if you are on autopilot, though, and the longer you are on it, you're not feeling the joy. You're not feeling the joy of living. And you often will put yourself on autopilot when you're not feeling so good. So it's an indication, the more your ego is asserting itself, it's an indication of how non-happy you are. But if you can just kind of silence that ego thought processes, the ego thought process, you can find a way to just shut it off or ignore it, then the bliss just kind of rises up into your brain. You were suppressing it this whole time. You were suppressing it with egoistic thoughts. So either you're doing ego thinking or you're doing now thinking, which is really no thought, which is really just readiness, openness, like indulging in the bliss, feeling the bliss, and just being like, this feels so good. Like, why do I have to think about anything? That's how you should be feeling at all times. You know what, another thing that creates this egoistic thought is just not feeling good. If you're a little bit depressed, your egoistic thoughts gets even more painful. It starts to churn out more depressive ideas and thoughts and past experiences. It just matches up with how you're feeling, and so those memories get churned up and then increase your negative feelings. See, it's not only are you obligated, is it your solemn duty to feel good, it's your solemn duty to feel really good. And if you're not feeling really good, clap your hands together and poof away this ego thought process. And what is the ego thought process? Unconscious thinking. Thinking that doesn't have an intention from your conscious mind, that is just running in the back of your head. That is the blocker of all bliss. If you can get a handle on that, if you can just watch it, so you're once removed from it, you're actually observing it do its thing. You're basically shutting it down that way. Because as long as you're watching it as a thing instead of experiencing it as your thought process, it's frozen in time. It's no longer a factor. But the most people are actually like, they think that's their thoughts. They think that is who they are. And it's the thought of their autopilot, the ego. The thought process of that little machine, that computer inside of you that can be in social situations and fend for itself when on autopilot, but ultimately when very significant decisions get made, it can't make them with a really higher view to things because it thinks of things in pure self-interest, which is, even from the ego point of view, not particularly advised, because you end up getting into conflicts over ridiculous stuff because it's your ego fighting rather than your higher judgment. So in order to get yourself to the point where you can go outside and actually not cause damage in the world, you have to be walking around like a god on earth, like full of joy and just completely free of all of these negative thoughts that just invade your mind for no reason, just because you've decided to pay attention, which everybody has, so you shouldn't feel that bad, but everybody's been sort of taught to listen, you can just daydream all day long. It's fine. It's not fine. Clap it away. Once you clap it away, once you get rid of this churning, unconscious thought going on in the back of your head, you just silence it, then the bliss starts to come in. So you got to do this by try for 15 seconds of no thought and see how good you feel after 15 seconds. Put it on a stopwatch and just go for 15 seconds. Say no thought, no thought, no thought, no thought. You'll just start to feel the bliss start to rise up. Then you can go a little longer, go 30 seconds. Try to see how long you can go timer-wise with not a thought going through your head. And if there is a thought that goes through your head, you're observing it objectively as a thought going through your head. You're not observing it. You're not thinking about it. That's fine too. Obviously, you can't continually, sometimes just the idea of saying, okay, I'm not going to think about anything, it causes thoughts. Your brain is always presenting some kind of image. As long as you're like, all right, I see that image, I'm watching that image, then you are in control and the brain isn't in control of you. And in that moment, you are stopping thought because you're acknowledging what it is, that it is thought and it's not reality. Because when you're indulging in unconscious thought, every thought you have is felt as though it is reality. And it's causing all the requisite poisons to come into your body whenever negative occurrences happen and you think of them. Or whenever you think of a future negative occurrence that you might have to deal with. So your autopilot doesn't need this thought process to work. It's kind of like the the directions in your car. You don't need it to have the vocal direction go along with the visual direction, right? I mean, the map still works without the vocal direction. It's the same thing for autopilot of the ego. Doesn't need this thought process to be happening in a way that you're acknowledging. The unconscious thought process that is floating in your brain at all times is the shield that keeps bliss from entering your brain. It's not required for the autopilot to function. It's just there as an appendage which can interfere with your happiness. And once you brush that away, clap it away, say it away, if you can just get rid of it for 15 seconds at a time and then extend the time, the bliss will come in, and then you'll be unstoppable in every metric. Once you can get this bliss pumping into you at a continual basis, all it takes is just getting rid of thought. No thought. There should be no thoughts in your head. The only thoughts should be like interesting ideas that you haven't mentioned before. Interesting talking points that you'd love to just get somebody's opinion on instead of just talking about the mundane bullshit. You're going to engage on a topic. That kind of thought is fine. Conscious thought is fine. But unconscious thought, no more. One or the other. And that unconscious thought is your ego. And as long as your mind is operating in the ego state, no bliss. So it's for the brain, ego or bliss. So you should really try to not be on autopilot for most of the time that you're living, because the longer you're on it, the more you're going to just identify with that thought process. So banish this ego from your mind. Kill it. And then see how the happiness, the bliss state just rises up. It's not something to achieve. It's something to let in. This is Lectures of Fallen Wisdom.